The plan was supposed to solve everything: empty the prisons, ease the overcrowding, buy time to build new capacity. But nobody asked what would happen when the criminals got out. The committee room was tense that morning. Every seat occupied, cameras positioned at multiple angles, journalists lined against the walls. This wasn't just another hearing. This was about public safety, about decisions that had put dangerous people back on the streets. Jeremy Clarkson sat at the witness table, perfectly still. His expression was grim. He'd read the reports, seen the statistics, heard the stories from victims whose attackers had been released early. Across from him sat Shabana Mahmood, the Justice Secretary. Surrounded by advisors, stacks of government documents in front of her, she looked prepared, confident. That wouldn't last. The committee chair cleared his throat. Thank you for attending today's urgent session on prison capacity and the early release scheme. We have Justice Secretary Shabana Mahmood and Mr. Jeremy Clarkson as witnesses. He adjusted his papers. Secretary Mahmood, perhaps you could outline the government's position on the emergency release program. Mahmood straightened in her seat. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The early release scheme was implemented in response to a genuine crisis in our prison system. We inherited facilities operating at 99% capacity, unsustainable and dangerous. She looked around the room. The program allows certain nonviolent offenders to be released after serving 40% of their sentence instead of 50%. This creates essential breathing room while we pursue long-term solutions, including new prison construction. She paused. Strict eligibility criteria ensure public safety. Violent offenders, sexual offenders, and those serving sentences over 4 years are excluded. Clarkson remained motionless. Mahmood continued. Over 10,000 inmates have been released under this scheme. The vast majority have not reoffended. We're monitoring outcomes closely and adjusting as needed. She sat back, clearly satisfied with her presentation. The chair turned to Clarkson. Mr. Clarkson, your response? Clarkson leaned forward slowly. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but carried weight. Secretary Mahmood, you said the vast majority haven't reoffended. What about the ones who have? The room went silent. Mahmood blinked. Obviously, any reoffending is concerning. How many? Clarkson interrupted calmly. Mahmood glanced at her notes. The current data shows approximately, give me a number, Clarkson said flatly. A pause. Roughly 400 individuals released under the scheme have been arrested for new offenses. Clarkson let that hang in the air. 400. In how many months? Since September 2024, so approximately 16 months, 400 people, Clarkson repeated, released early, arrested again, for new crimes. He pulled a document from his folder. But that's not the full picture, is it? Because that's just arrests. What about crimes committed but not yet solved? What about victims who haven't reported? Mahmoud's expression tightened. We can only work with verified data. Well, let's talk about verified data. Then Clarkson interrupted. He held up another paper. James Patterson, released after serving 40% of a burglary sentence. 3 weeks later, arrested for armed robbery. A shopkeeper ended up in hospital. He looked up. He was your early release success story? Murmurs rippled through the committee. Mahmood cleared her throat. Individual cases are tragic, but statistically, David Morrison, Clarkson continued, speaking over her. Released early from a drug-dealing sentence. 2 months later, arrested for assault. His victim, a 19-year-old woman, still has nightmares. His voice hardened. Statistics to you, real people to them. The room was very quiet now. A conservative committee member spoke up. Secretary Mahmood, how do you justify releasing criminals who then immediately reoffend? Mahmood tried to regain control. The alternative was total system collapse. Prisons at 99% capacity cannot function safely. Whose fault is that? Clarkson asked sharply. Mahmood turned to him. I'm sorry, the capacity crisis. Whose fault is it? Mahmood hesitated. As I mentioned, we inherited, you were in opposition for 14 years. Clarkson interrupted. Labor was in government before that, for 13 years. When exactly did your party plan to build new prisons? Silence. Because here's what I don't understand, Clarkson continued. You spent over a decade in opposition, criticizing the conservatives for not building prisons. Fair enough. But then you get into government and your solution isn't to build prisons, it's to empty the ones you have. He leaned back. That's not solving the problem. That's giving up. Mahmoud's face reddened. We are committed to building new capacity. When? Clarkson challenged. Give me a date. When will the first new prison open? Mahmoud glanced at her advisor. Construction timelines are complex 2028, Clarkson said flatly. At the earliest. That's 3 years from now. He pulled out another document. This is from the Ministry of Justice's own projections. New prison capacity won't be available until late 2028 or early 2029. He looked directly at Mahmood. So for the next 3 years, your plan is what? Keep releasing criminals early and hope they don't hurt anyone? The room erupted in murmurs. A labor committee member tried to defend. Surely the Justice Secretary is balancing multiple priorities. Like what? Clarkson asked. What priority is more important than public safety? He turned back to Mahmood. You released 10,000 criminals early. 400 of them have already been arrested for new crimes. How many more victims do there need to be before you admit this policy is dangerous? Mahmoud's jaw tightened. Mr. Clarkson, you're cherry-picking cases, am I? Clarkson challenged. He pulled out yet another paper. This is from the Victims Commissioner. They've documented over 200 cases where early release offenders committed crimes against previous victims or their families. He looked up. 200 cases. That's not cherry-picking. That's a pattern. Mahmood said nothing. Sarah Mitchell, Clarkson continued quietly. Her ex-partner was serving time for domestic violence. Released early. He found her. Put her in hospital. His voice was controlled but intense. She's terrified to leave her house now. But I'm sure your statistics show the program is working fine. The room was absolutely silent. An SNP member spoke up. Scotland hasn't implemented similar early release. Because Scotland looked at the numbers and realized it was insane. Clarkson agreed. He gestured broadly. Every expert said this would happen. Police warned you, prison officers warned you, victims groups warned you, but you did it anyway. He looked at Mahmood. Why? Mahmood took a breath. Because the alternative was prisoners sleeping in police cells, in court holding areas, in conditions that violate human rights. Human rights, Clarkson repeated. He leaned forward. What about the human rights of the shopkeeper who got beaten by someone you released? What about Sarah Mitchell's right to feel safe in her own home? His voice rose slightly. You're so concerned about prisoners' rights that you forgot about everyone else's. Mahmoud's expression was furious now. That's completely unfair, is it? Clarkson challenged. Then explain why you prioritize prisoner comfort over public safety. That's not what happened. It's exactly what happened. Clarkson stood up. The cameras followed him. You had a capacity crisis. Fine, there were options. Emergency legislation to use military facilities, temporary structures, accelerated building programs. He counted on his fingers. Instead, you chose the easiest option. Open the doors, let them out. Hope for the best. He shook his head. And when people get hurt and they're getting hurt, you hide behind statistics. The room was tense now. A Lib Dem committee member tried to intervene. Surely some early release was inevitable. Given the constraints, nothing is inevitable. Clarkson said sharply, you make choices, you live with consequences. He turned to Mahmood. You chose to release criminals. The consequence is that some of them committed new crimes. Own it. Mahmood stood as well. Mr. Clarkson, you're oversimplifying an extraordinarily complex situation. It's not complex, Clarkson said flatly. When you let criminals out of prison early, some of them commit more crimes. That's not complex. That's obvious. He pulled out another document. This is from the Prison Officers Association. They warned you specifically that releasing inmates at 40% instead of 50% would increase reoffending rates by approximately 15%. He looked up. They were right. Reoffending among early release prisoners is running at exactly that rate. Mahmoud's aide whispered urgently. Those projections were based on limited data. They were based on decades of experience, Clarkson countered. Prison officers know what happens when you release people too early. You ignored them. A young conservative MP stood suddenly. My constituent was attacked by someone released under this scheme. What am I supposed to tell her? Mahmoud tried to respond, but the room was getting louder. Another MP shouted, 3 victims in my constituency, 4 in mine. The chair banged his gavel. Order! This committee will maintain order. But the anger was real and building. Clarkson remained standing, watching calmly as the chaos unfolded. When it finally quieted, he spoke again. Secretary Mahmood, let me ask you something direct. Everyone turned to him. If one of these early release criminals hurt someone you love, would you still defend this policy? The question hung in the air. Mahmood's face went pale. That's an unfair hypothetical. It's not hypothetical for the families affected, Clarkson said quietly. It's their reality because of your decision. He sat down slowly. You can talk about capacity crises and inherited problems all you want, but at the end of the day, you release dangerous people early, and some of them hurt people. He looked directly at her. That's on you. Complete silence. Mahmood remained standing, but looked uncertain for the first time. The chair cleared his throat. Perhaps we should. One more thing, Clarkson said. Everyone waited. You said you're monitoring outcomes and adjusting as needed. What adjustments have you made? Mahmood blinked. We're continuously reviewing. Specifically, what have you changed since the program started? A pause. We've refined eligibility criteria. How? Another pause. We're working with probation services to enhance supervision. Working with them? How? Clarkson pressed. Mahmood glanced desperately at her advisors. The details are still being finalized. So you haven't actually changed anything, Clarkson said. Mahmood opened her mouth. Closed it. 400 reoffenders, Clarkson said quietly. Hundreds of new victims, and you haven't changed a single thing about how this program works. He shook his head. That's not monitoring. That's denial. The session ended shortly afterward. MPs filed out in angry clusters. Journalists rushed to their stations. Within the hour, the footage was everywhere. Social media exploded with outrage. News channels ran it continuously. But one moment dominated every headline. Shabana Mahmood unable to name a single policy change despite hundreds of reoffenders. Jeremy Clarkson having exposed the early release scheme as a dangerous failure. And, across Britain, victims and their families watching, finally seeing someone speak the truth they'd been living. The prisons were full, so they emptied them, and people got hurt. The policy was clear, the consequences were brutal, and everyone now knew who was responsible.